Right now, somewhere in your phone, there's a specific song that can make the hairs on your arms stand up, a particular 4 seconds of it. You probably already know which one. No other animal on Earth does this, and about 5 to 10% of humans can't feel it at all. Tonight, you're going to put your headphones in, hit play on something you've heard 100 times, and at one exact moment, your skin is going to react like you just walked into a cold room. Your scalp will tighten. The back of your neck will prickle. For maybe 3 seconds, a piece of organized air will hijack your nervous system. And then it'll pass, and you'll just keep walking to the kitchen. We treat this as normal. It is extremely not normal. The technical name for it is Frisson. And the more neuroscientists look at it, the less sense it makes that you should feel anything at all. Most people assume the chills are just strong emotion. You love the song, your body reacts, end of story. But that's not quite right. Sad songs do it. Songs in languages you don't speak do it. Songs you actively dislike can do it if they hit a certain structural moment. Whatever this is, it isn't really about the music you love. It's about something your brain is doing underneath the music. In 2011, a researcher named Valorie Salimpoor at McGill University ran one of the strangest studies in modern neuroscience. She took people who reliably got chills from specific pieces of music, put them in a PET scanner, and injected them with a radioactive tracer that binds to dopamine receptors. Then she played their songs. The goal was to see, in real time, whether music, just pattern sound, no food, no sex, no drug, could actually trigger dopamine release in the brain's reward system. It did. The nucleus accumbens, the same small structure that lights up for cocaine, for orgasm, for a hot meal when you're starving, fired during the chills. Salimpoor and her co-author Robert Zatorre published it in Nature Neuroscience, and the result was clean. Music on its own is a primary reward. Your brain treats a key change the way it treats a cheeseburger. But here's the part that broke the story open. The dopamine didn't peak during the chills. It peaked about 15 seconds before. The reward system was firing hardest in the build-up, the moment right before the drop, the inhale before the chorus, the held note before it resolves. By the time your skin actually reacted, the chemical event was already winding down. Which means the chills aren't a reward for the beautiful moment. They're a reward for correctly predicting it. This lines up with work by the musicologist David Huron, who spent years arguing that nearly all musical emotion comes from a single mechanism, expectation. Your brain is a prediction machine. It is constantly, secretly guessing what sound comes next, the next beat, the next note, the next syllable. When a song sets up a pattern and then either confirms it at exactly the right moment or breaks it in exactly the right way, your brain registers a prediction error. A tiny pleasurable shock of "I was right" or "I was almost right." Dopamine floods in. And if the violation is big enough and the timing is sharp enough, that flood spills over into your autonomic nervous system and your body briefly thinks something important is happening. So it does what it does for important things. It raises the hairs on your skin. That last part is the real glitch. Piloerection, goosebumps, is an ancient mammalian reflex. In a cat, it puffs up the fur to look bigger when threatened. In a cold animal, it traps a layer of warm air against the skin. You inherited the wiring, but you barely have the fur for it anymore. So when a Sigur Rós track triggers the response, you get the reflex with none of its original function, a 2-million-year-old survival circuit fired by a Spotify playlist. Which raises the obvious question, why doesn't this happen to everyone? If music is hijacking a universal reward system, why do some people listen to the most devastating piece of music ever written and feel, by their own honest report, basically nothing? In 2016, a researcher named Matthew Sachs, then at Harvard, scanned the brains of people who got chills from music and compared them to people who didn't. He wasn't looking at activity, he was looking at structure. And he found something specific. The chill feelers had denser bundles of white matter, physical wiring, connecting their auditory cortex to 2 other regions. One was the anterior insula, which handles bodily awareness and emotional feeling. The other was the medial prefrontal cortex, which assigns personal meaning to what you're experiencing. In other words, the people who get chills have a thicker cable between the part of the brain that hears the sound and the part of the brain that feels what the sound means. The signal travels faster, it arrives louder, it bleeds into systems it isn't strictly supposed to touch. That cable seems to be partly something you're born with and partly something you build. People who grew up playing instruments or who spent their adolescence emotionally fused to specific albums tend to have stronger responses as adults, which is a quietly strange thought. The teenager who listened to the same record on repeat for a year wasn't just developing taste, they were laying down white matter. They were physically wiring a chills pathway into a brain that will still have it 40 years later. And the people who feel nothing, their wiring is just routed differently. They're not broken, they're not cold. They process music perfectly well, it just doesn't cross the bridge into the rest of them. There's evidence some of them experience the same dopamine spike in a quieter form without the bodily reflex attached. The light is on, it's just not leaking under the door. Here's where it gets weird. From an evolutionary standpoint, none of this should exist. Organized sound is not food, it is not a mate, it is not a predator. There is no obvious reason a sequence of pitches should be wired into the same reward circuit as survival itself. Steven Pinker famously, and a little dismissively, called music auditory cheesecake, an accidental byproduct of brains that evolved to do other things, like parse speech and track threats in the dark. But cheesecake doesn't usually make you cry on a bus. And the chills response in particular is so specific, so timed, so consistent across cultures, that a lot of researchers now think it isn't an accident at all. One theory, music is exercising the prediction engine itself. Every song is a low-stakes simulator for the brain's most important skill, guessing what's about to happen and being rewarded when it's right. We didn't evolve to love music. We evolved to love being right about the future, and music is the purest, safest possible version of that game. The chills are your nervous system applauding itself. Which means the song you can't get through without your eyes stinging isn't really doing the work. You are. The melody is just a controlled environment where your brain gets to predict and resolve and predict again, faster and more accurately than almost anything else in your life lets it. The artist built the maze. The chills are you finding your way through it half a second before you should have been able to. So tonight, when you put the headphones in and that one part of that one song hits and your skin does the thing it does, pay attention to the second before it. The breath, the pause, the note that hasn't landed yet. That's the moment your brain is alone in the dark guessing. The goosebumps are just the receipt. And if you're one of the people who never feels it, you're not missing a soul. You're wired through a different room. The dopamine is probably still there, it just doesn't knock on the door of your skin. Either way, something very old in you is listening very carefully to something very new. And for 3 seconds, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, a piece of moving air is enough to remind your body it's alive. Sit with that one.